The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Q. Jesus spoke to his disciples, "Do not be anxious about your life. Don't worry about getting enough food or having clothes to wear. Life means more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Look at the ravens. They don't plant seeds or gather a harvest. They have neither storehouses nor barns, yet God feeds them. Aren't you more important than birds? Can any of you, for all your worrying, add a single moment to your life? If worry can't change the smallest things, then why be anxious about the rest? Look at the lilies that grow wild in the fields. They don't weave clothes for themselves. But I tell you that even King Solomon, in all his splendor, was not dressed as beautifully as these flowers. If that is how God clothes the grasses which are green today and burned in the sun tomorrow, how much more will God provide for you? How little faith you have. Don't be blinded by the pursuit of food or clothing or possessions. Stop worrying about these things. Only those who lack spirit and soul pursue them. You have a Father who knows what you need. Set your heart on God, and these other things will be given to you. Do not pile up treasures here on earth. They will be destroyed by moths and rust and stolen by thieves. Store your riches in heaven, where moths and rust are powerless and thieves cannot break in. Wherever your treasure is, there will your heart be also." Gospel inspired by God.
Thanks be to God.
As late as the 1950s and the early 1960s, there were still some homes, a lot of homes in Ireland still actually, that didn't have electricity. One of them was the home of my Aunt Mag. She was actually my grand-aunt, but because I heard my mother referring to her as Aunt Mag when I was a little child, I called her Aunt Mag as well. And she lived in Galway, in Connemara, a very remote part of Western Ireland. And she had no electricity. And so her light source was candles, and she did all her cooking and all her baking, and she did a lot of cooking and a lot of baking over an open peat fire. And then, late in the 1950s, the Irish government started a scheme which they called the Rural Electrification Scheme. It was an effort to try to bring electricity to all the outlying areas. And so electric poles started marching across the countryside to all the isolated little hamlets and homes. And Aunt Mag was the beneficiary. So they installed the electricity and they put a meter on it, and they thought you'd have to pay a little bit every month, depending on how much you use. So the next summer, I used to go up there on my summer vacations every year. I go up there and the electricity is in. I go into the small little house and there's an electric light bulb hanging down in the middle of the ceiling. So I said to her, "Aunt Mag, how do you enjoy the electricity?" And she says, "Oh, it is grand entirely. I do turn it on in the evening when I'm looking for the matches to light the candle." And that's exactly what happened. As soon as it started getting dusk, she turned on the light, scurried around to find where the box of matches was hidden, and then came and lit 2 or 3 candles, placed them in various parts of the house, and then turned off the light, because it cost money. And it became a great metaphor for me for the ways in which we penny pinch in how we try to do life, cutting ourselves off from God's largesse. It's like we're so anxious about providing all these little things for ourselves. And there's God providing copiously for an entire universe of beings, but we're not plugged into it. We don't switch it on, except in crisis moments. And that's what I'm going to focus about today, based on the Gospel of Q this morning. And I'm going to make 5 main points this morning. First one, I'm going to talk about Jesus' flowery language. Secondly, I'll talk about Jesus is away with the birds. Thirdly, I will say there's a contract out on your life. A contract out on your life. Fourthly, I'm going to pick up in this phrase that says, "O ye of little faith," you have so little faith. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the practice of the present moment. So there are the 5 points I'll make this morning. So the first one, Jesus' flowery language. Now when you study the theory of evolution, the place where Darwin shot himself in the foot was with flowers. Non-flowering plants had arrived on planet Earth 300 million years ago. Flowering plants only arrived 100 million years ago. And Freud, at least Darwin acknowledged, did I say Freud first? Okay, sorry. That was a Freudian slip. That was evolutionary regression. Okay. So where Darwin shot himself in the foot was he preached the theory of what he called gradualism. That evolution happens very, very, very slowly, slowly by slowly, tiny little morphing of the systems until finally you've got a very, very different species somewhere along the line. And he recognized that there was no evidence of what happened between the non-flowering plants 300 million years ago and the flowering plants just 100 million years ago. And he acknowledged if the missing links are not found in the fossil record, then my theory is wrong. And the missing links have never been found. In fact, the fossil record has a total dearth of any missing links connecting flowers to each other or connecting, previous primates to Homo sapiens. The missing link has never been found. So the Freudian notion of this gradual increase in evolution is patently wrong. So much so that in 1972, a very famous Harvard biologist called Stephen Jay Gould had to come up with a totally different theory. He called it punctuated equilibria. And it's the notion that evolution happens in quantum steps. For a long period of time, there's no change, and then all of a sudden, there's a huge change, and then it continues on a plateau for a while, and then it jumps again. So Jesus had it much more correctly than Darwin did. Because Jesus could see to the core of the evolutionary impulse and the extraordinary creativity even of flowers. Jesus was pointing out to us again and again and again that perhaps our greatest teacher of all is nature. There is no teacher to beat nature as far as I'm concerned. And he's constantly using metaphors from nature. When you compare the difference between Paul's teaching and Jesus' teaching, Jesus' parables are almost totally organic parables. Paul's have to do with warfare and wrestling and fighting and running, all these kinds of competitive metaphors. Jesus is always talking about nature metaphors. And when he says, look at the lilies of the field or look at the birds of the sky, he's not saying just, think about these things. He's saying, I want you to really, really look at how flowers survive. I want you to really look at how birds thrive. He's really asking us to step out into nature and to start looking at nature. Instead of that, we've done 3 things with nature, it seems to me. The first thing is we have vilified it. The second thing is we have then exploited it. And the third thing is we've imitated it. So that which we've despised, the caricature of it, we then continue to imitate. So the first one is we have vilified nature. We've preached that nature is red in tooth and claw. We've preached that evolution proceeds by natural selection and survival of the fittest. This dog-eat-dog war out there. And then, having done that, we've exploited nature completely. We've taken a word from the Hebrew Scriptures in the very first chapter of the Hebrew Scriptures, the word radah, where God gives us radah over nature. And radah has 3 meanings in Hebrew. It means to dominate, it means to exploit, or it means to be responsible for, to look out for. We've chosen the first 2 meanings of it. We've dominated and we've exploited nature as if it was just resources for the human family. And then with all kinds of the hypocrisy of it, then having dominated and declared almost that nature is almost satanic, then we've imitated it. We built our political models according to this law of natural selection and survival of the fittest and red in tooth and claw. We've built our military models on this, and we've built our economic models on this. So that which we vilified and exploited and said was bad, we have then imitated in our political systems through dominating the little people. We've used it in our military systems to conquer the little people in the third world. And we've used it finally in our economic models to totally repress 99% of the population so that the other 1% can benefit. So we've done this extraordinary job in it. And the truth is, nature does not operate like that. Nature operates mainly through symbiosis and cooperation. I'm not saying there's not predator-prey in it, and I'll talk about that in a few moments. But what I'm saying is that nature mainly operates through cooperation and symbiosis. What would happen if we built our political systems on that understanding of nature? What would happen if we built our military models on that understanding of nature? What would happen if we created our economic models from that understanding of nature? So when Jesus talked in this flowery language, he wasn't just using metaphors. He was telling us, guys, there's a lesson. There are many lessons out there to be learned. Look at how nature operates, and it will give you a clue as to how to operate as a human species, because you too are part of nature. That's my first point. Second point, then I talk about Jesus being away with the birds. In the early 1920s, in a small little rural town in England, there was a group of birds that they're called the blue tits, and they began to discover that people were having milk delivered to their homes with little caps on the bottles. And these little birds figured out a way of opening the bottle tops or piercing the bottle tops and drinking the top 3 inches of the cream from the bottle, just in this one little village. Within a few months, this had spread to the whole area. And within 2 or 3 years, all this species of birds, the blue tits in England, were doing it all over the country. Now, were they holding conferences and seminars? Within 2 or 3 years, it had spread to continental Europe and to Holland in particular. And so all over Holland, these little blue tits would arrive on the doorstep as soon as the milk came, take the top off the bottle, and drink the top 3 inches of cream. And then in 1939, when the war started, they stopped delivering milk in Holland. And there was no milk delivered in bottles for 7 years. And then they resurrected it about 1946 or 47, and the blue tits went back and started it again immediately. Now, the interesting thing is, the lifespan of a blue tit is 3 years. So how did they figure it out? There's a gap of 7 years in, they figured out how to do it. Now, there's a brilliant English biologist called Rupert Sheldrake who talks about morphogenetic fields, that when a particular activity is engaged in sufficiently, there's literally a template, an energetic template created, and it becomes easier and easier for other people to imitate it. My favorite example of that is Roger Bannister. For a long, long, long time, it was felt that it was actually physiologically impossible to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. They'd been trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. Nobody could do it. And then this young student in Oxford in 1954, he ran the first sub-4-minute mile. And within a year, 30 other runners had done it. So there's like some kind of a morphogenetic field set up. So when Jesus is talking about the birds, he's talking about this extraordinary morphogenetic field that we can create. He says not a single bird falls from the heavens without your heavenly Father being aware of it. He's asking us to look at how birds, they don't just survive, they thrive. They do all this kind of creative stuff. He says, can't you be creative like that? Why are you worried? You're going to find there'll be bottles of milk someplace and you'll figure out how to take the top off it and drink the cream if you just watch what the birds are doing. So when we start watching what nature does, we have all the clues to figuring out how to creatively not just survive on our planet, but to thrive on our planet. There's an organization actually dedicated to this pursuit. It's called the Bioneers. And they have their annual conference in San Rafael every year. And it's an umbrella group of organizations that look at nature, how nature solves all its problems, to see can we apply that to agriculture, apply it to medicine, apply it to education, apply it to inner city violence. Everywhere there's lessons from nature. And so I really, really advocate that on a regular basis, that people spend quality time alone, silently in nature, moving very slowly. You're not going to see nature operate if you're out with somebody else just chatting. And you're not going to see operate if you're out there with earphones listening to some music and kind of sprinting or jogging. You need to be moving really slowly. You need to be totally focused. You need to be silent. And you need to be alone. And then you begin to see the wonder of the flowers and the miracle of the birds. And it gives you extraordinarily important information about how to live your individual life and how to live the life as a species. That's my second point. Third point is this. There's a contract out in your life. I really believe there's a contract out in your life. And this is what I call a preconception contract. That every single one of us is down here because we've chosen and volunteered for mission and for incarnation. But none of us came down alone. We're part of a kind of a nested series of contracts. So the inner contract might be the contract you have with your soulmate. Then the next level of the contract is the contract you have with your soul pod, that small group of souls with whom you've traveled from incarnation to incarnation. And then the next contract might be the level of your family, siblings and extended cousins and aunts and uncles, etc. And then the next level of the contract is the contract you have with your culture or your nation. And then the next level of the contract is that what you have with the entire human species all over planet Earth. And then the final level of it is the contract you have with all sentient beings, from the tiniest little caterpillars to the most advanced extraterrestrials. We're all part of a contract of God's gift of incarnation. And so this contract becomes really important, that we embrace this contract really, really fully. And the interesting thing is, when we embrace this contract, all our needs are met. We come in here roped together. I mentioned one time about a book I'd read about a climber who got lost on K2. K2 is the second highest mountain on the planet, but it's a much more difficult climb than Everest. And many more people have been lost on K2 than have been lost on Everest. And I asked myself the question at the end of reading this book, why in God's name would anybody want to climb K2? And the answer was obvious, because it's there. And because humans love a challenge, and because by challenging ourselves, we develop physical ability, we develop mental toughness, we develop emotional resilience, and more importantly than that, we come together, we always climb these mountains roped together. Almost nobody attempts to do it on their own. We come in here roped together, so if one person slips, the other guy's got her back. And I asked myself the same question, of all the planets into which we could have chosen to incarnate, why would we choose planet Earth? Planet Earth, I think, is the K2 of the Milky Way galaxy. It's the toughest planet in the galaxy. Really, really difficult. We have these really confined spaces. We got tiny little laptops to operate from. We forget stuff all the time. So why would we want to incarnate on planet Zorg, where it's a breeze? Because if you want to really work and you really want to grow, planet Borg is not going to do it for you. We come down here because we want to develop mental toughness, emotional resilience, physical abilities, and because we're roped together for the journey. None of us comes down here and that we're not roped to everybody else. But there's amnesia created for this fact, and we all think, we're individuals, I got to look out for myself, you can't trust anybody. We're roped together. All of us are roped together. The birds and the flowers and human beings are all roped together for this journey. And every single one of us as individuals and every single species has all the resources they need for incarnation. Source did not agree to this contract and then deny us the resources we need to fulfill the contract. Every individual and every species has all the resources they need in order to fulfill this contract. And it's a complicated contract because there is food chains and shelter chains in it. So does that make one group more important than the other? So because we're omnivores and we can eat vegetables and we can eat meats of all kinds, does that make us more important? No. There's just part of the contract is if you come in as a human, you're in a particular place in the food chain. Doesn't make you more important or less important. In fact, we're just another part of the food chain. There are creatures that feed off us, bacteria, parasites, and then ultimately the worms. So we're part of a food chain, no matter how important we think we are. We're part of a shelter train. Every single one of us is using other resources to find shelter. The birds will use, they'll pick wool from sheep and create little nests for themselves, or they'll use the trees to nest for themselves, and we'll take lumber from the trees and make shelters for ourselves, or we'll take wool off sheep and make clothes for ourselves. So we're all part of this chain of shelter and this chain of food. But we're all being provided all the resources we need for the journey. And moreover, it's important for a soul to experience all levels of incarnation. I guarantee you that every single one of us has had lifetimes as flowers. Every single one of us has had lifetimes as birds. Right now we're having experiences of lifetime as a human being. But we visit all the possibilities of incarnation. And so there have been times when we've been elsewhere in the food chain and in the shelter chain. So it's not so important where we are in the chain, it's only that we do it with mindfulness and with respect for those above us and those below us in the chain. That we do this because we've been in all the other positions. So if God is looking out for us, then why do flowers die? Or why do birds die? Or why do humans die? Because we've built in an exit strategy to every incarnation. If incarnation continued forever, it would be really boring and really dull, and there'd be less and less opportunity for growth. So we put a shelf life on each incarnation. Whether we're incarnating as flowers, or incarnating as birds, or incarnating as human beings, we put a shelf life on it. Because we want to experience many different configurations within the same species, or many different configurations outside in different species. So we put the shelf life on it. It's not God who's saying, okay, time up, come home. We have decided ourselves. And so death is not a failure. Death is the realization, the predetermined exit strategy that says, by that time I will have learned what I need to learn as a flower or a bird, as Sean, whatever it is. Now is time to learn a different lesson in a different kind of configuration. But the thing that the human experience adds to it is that we have the ability to take detours and to get lost. Most of other nature is driven by an instinct for that which is right. We're driven by a search for free will that leads to freedom, that leads to compassion. So all the detours we take and all the evil and greed we create actually is part of the journey home. Because in the absence of the ability to make poor choices, we can't develop free will. And in the absence of developing free will, there's no opportunity for freedom. And in the absence of freedom, there's no ability to make compassionate choices. And so the very fact that we can make mistakes is the very thing that allows us to go from free will, which is simply the ability to do as I please, to freedom, which is the ability to do as that pleases God, and then to compassion. If there were no suffering, there would be no opportunity for learning compassion. So even our detours serve us. And we're at the end of a very grievous detour as a species, in my opinion. 2011 is the end of a very grievous detour. We've gone horribly astray in how we've done planet Earth. But even that has been useful because we're waking up in numbers and at a depth that has never happened before, it seems to me. When I look at what is happening in our world, and I hope that we look at this as we do our exploration groups, when I look at what's happening, we've finally realized that we've been on this maybe 5,000 year long detour, and now we're beginning to realize we need to wake up fully. That's my third point. Fourth point is this then. Christ says, O ye of little faith. There's a very little simple formula in mathematics, in engineering or physics or astrophysics, that talks about the force of attraction between two heavenly bodies. So if you've got two heavenly bodies, like a sun and a star, sun and a moon, or a planet and its satellites, whatever, the force that attracts them, they call it F, meaning just force. F is equal to the mass of one planet multiplied by the mass of the other planet divided by the square of the distance between them. So if you've got two big planets, we call one of them just M1, it weighs M1, and the other is M2, it weighs M2, and the distance between the two of them is R. Then it's very simple. The force of attraction is equal to M1 multiplied by M2 divided by R squared. So there are three ways of increasing the force of attraction. If one of the planets got bigger, then immediately the force would get stronger. Or if the other planet got bigger, the force of attraction would get stronger. Or if the distance between them was shorter, the force of attraction would be much stronger. Now the difficulty is we have so little faith. Faith is like 1 over R. Faith is inversely related to the distance between that for which I hope and my belief that I can have it. And so if instead of dreaming from my tiny little ego, Kathy, you're welcome. They're sitting here waiting for you. Good to see you, Pat. How you doing? Good. Good to see you. There's one of Kathleen's nieces. If instead of dreaming my dream from a tiny little ego, which is a tiny, tiny planet, very, very difficult for a tiny planet to attract something really great. If instead of dreaming from my soul, my ego, I started dreaming from my soul. The soul is a ginormous planet. Then I have an extraordinary ability to attract towards me that which I want. And if instead of a tiny little personal dream, I want to be, more money or whatever, bigger car or whatever, if I were to dream a big dream, I can embed my own personal needs in it, but if I were to dream the advent of Christ consciousness in our times, for instance, that's a huge planet. Then the force of attraction is really, really huge. If I'm dreaming that level of a dream from the soul, instead of a tiny little dream from my ego, the force of attraction is huge. And this is where faith comes in. if the distance between the soul and that for which the soul aspires is shrunken through my faith, if my faith is really strong, I can collapse that distance down to almost zero. And then I literally have an infinite ability to pull stuff towards me. That's what Christ is talking about this morning. It is the ability to really attract that which I need by dreaming from the soul level and dreaming a really, really, really big dream. But instead of that, we get lost in little details. If you're going on vacation, you're going on taking your car on vacation, it's important to put gas in the tank, and it's important to fill your suitcase. But the vacation is not about the gas, and it's not about the suitcase. The vacation is about the vacation. And when we come for incarnation, there are particular resources we need for incarnation. But incarnation is not about the resources. We have to provide the resources. But incarnation is not about the resources. Incarnation is about incarnation. Incarnation is about learning how to love. But so often we're worried, what? Do I have enough gas in the tank? Oh my God, did I bring my tuxedo? It's not important what's in your suitcase. It's not important to attend so much to the gas. Fill the tank and then go for it. Incarnation is about believing that the gas tank is full. It has all the fuel you need to last you right to the very end until the exit strategy you've planned. And you've all the clothes you need, all the resources. Then you're like the birds of the heaven, and then you're like the lilies of the field. Which brings me to my final point. The practice of the present moment. I've told you this story before. I'm a hopeless navigator, as you well know. I'm constantly getting lost. And I was back in Ireland about maybe 10, 15 years ago, and my brother Seamus always gives me a car when I go home. He gives me a car, and he used to give me his credit card when I was home from Africa. And he'd get a credit card and I'd get a car from him for the duration of my vacation. And I'm driving in a city called Limerick, which I don't know at all. And I'm looking for a place called Washington Street. And I'm driving along, I'm hopelessly lost. So I finally stop and I wind down my window, and there's a guy passing by, and I stick my head out the window and I said, "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to Washington Street?" And he looks down into the car at this kind of bearded, long-haired weirdo, thinking just, how intelligent could this guy be? And he says, "Washington Street." To tell you the truth now, if I was going to Washington Street, I wouldn't start from here at all. And I crack up. I say, "Dude, this is where we are." Like, it's so complicated to tell you how to get to Washington Street from here. I wish we'd met someplace else. It would have been a lot easier. But I can only get to Washington Street from where I'm at right now. And that's the practice of the present moment. We can only get to where we want to go by accepting totally the gift of the present moment. The reason it's called a present moment is that it's a gift. It is a gift. And the gift, this present moment, is not just bad luck. The present moment is the logical, inevitable, consistent outcome of all the choices that all the players had made in the past. It didn't just happen. It's the logical, consistent, inevitable outcome of all the choices that all of the players had made in the past. And the best way to predict the future is to create the future. And the best way of creating the future is to look at the choices I'm making in the present moment. Because the future will be the logical, inevitable, consistent outcome of all the choices that all the players are making in the now. So the practice of the present moment is a really, really beautiful thing. And that's what Jesus is advocating. Be here now. Be totally present to the moment. And then you're creating a future of alignment with love. And so as you go out into nature, and as you just sit and watch a spider weave a web, or you watch trout jumping out of the stream to catch a fly, sometimes you're the fly, sometimes you're the fish, and sometimes you're the water. When you sit and just watch that, then you fully get what Christ consciousness is about.